In wills and probate work, accuracy matters, and time is of the essence. Designed for UK private client law firms, Leap's all-in-one legal software automates wills, probate and estate administration, supporting compliance and growth without increasing overheads. Learn more at leap.co.uk.
You're listening to the Today's Wills and Probate podcast, one of the leading sources of information for the wills and probate sector. Don't forget to subscribe and sign up to our free newsletter at todayswillsandprobate.co.uk and follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter.
Hello, welcome along to the latest Today's Wills and Probate podcast. Today I welcome on to the discussion Steve Bish. Steve is the founder, the director of your own estate planning business, Steve S. Bish Estate Planning, based in Hertfordshire. And the reason we've invited you onto the podcast, and we're going to talk about wills and all that kind of business in general, but you're the author of a new book, which is the story of how you got into will writing, how it became your profession. And it's a very personal story as well, Steve, as we'll get into. So thanks very much indeed for joining the podcast.
Thank you for inviting me. Pleasure to be here.
In the first instance, I've given listeners a little bit of an overview into who you are, but tell us a bit about yourself, Steve, your background. I know, for example, that will writing isn't your sort of first profession. You know, like a lot of people in this sector, you've been in and around business for a long time as well. So tell us a little bit about yourself and how you came into the sector.
Well, background is sales and marketing, really. Sales training, sales recruiting, marketing, etc. for a number of companies. Ended up in the mid to late 90s setting up a traditional window company. I'd seen a niche for traditional wooden windows, and I'm no craftsman by any means, but I knew someone who was, and it was just one of these things that comes out of a pub conversation. You know, how much would it cost you to make a box sash window? And an old friend from school said, you know, a couple £100. At that time, there was another traditional box sash window company charging about £2,000 for a window. So I thought, well, there's a niche here. And we ended up setting up our own workshop and, sort of hitting conservation areas for Georgian and box sash windows and that sort of thing. But I still saw it as marketing because I didn't have anything to do with the surveying or the actual manufacture. Mm-hmm. I got people in who could do that, obviously. So that was my immediate past profession previous to estate planning.
As I say, it's a profession that a lot of people come to sort of later on in life, actually, isn't it? So, and then you spotted an opportunity to set up a franchise. That's kind of led you to where you are now.
Yeah, I saw the franchise opportunity, and the first part of the book actually explains, you know, about a very close friend being killed in a road traffic accident one evening, and I saw what the family went through with the rules of intestacy. And if that hadn't have happened, when I saw the franchise opportunity a couple of years later, I probably wouldn't have given it a second glance. But, you know, I was looking for an exit strategy. I was looking for something else, and it sort of hit home. And sort of 2 weeks training initially up in the northeast, up in Newton Aycliffe, and my own little franchise. And from then on, it was a case of, you know, running that franchise or running other people's companies or just working self-employed for other estate planning companies. And then post-COVID, I was actually looking for a trust supplier and saw you had to take all the software. And I thought, well, why not set up on my own? So 2022, S. Bish Estate Planning was born.
You allude to the fact that the decision to go into will writing was kind of driven by a personal tragedy. This is your friend Carl, who was killed in a road traffic accident. Tell us about your relationship with Carl and why it was such an important part of your decision to go into estate planning.
Carl was a very, very close friend. My wife and I, we bought our first house together in the very early 90s, and it was one of these new build. We were the first ones to move in. There was the two show houses, then there was us, and then the rest of the houses were still being built. And it was good that as people moved in, Everyone knew each other. It was very sort of old school, and everyone knew their neighbours because you all moved in one after the other. And Carl and his wife were one of the first to move in. They actually parked over our driveway when they were coming to look at how their house was getting on. And I remember, I would come around the corner and sort of bib to say, "Can I get in there?" And Carl's wife Anne, I remember her saying, "Oh, you fell out with the neighbours. You've upset the neighbours before we've even moved in." And we just hit it off straight away. Really good. They'd have dinner at ours, we'd have dinner at theirs, and yeah, we're really, really close friends. When I had a sort of middle-aged teenage moment and decided to buy a vintage Vespa, Carl, who was a little bit younger than me, and his parents didn't allow him to have a scooter during the sort of mod scooter revival of the late 70s, early 80s. So he went out and bought a vintage Lambretta, from the same guy I bought my Vespa from, or had him work on it anyway. And yeah, so when the accident happened, we was on a ride out. We were supposed to be going down to Soho that evening, and we ended up just going to Watford. And there was a lot of disgruntledness in the club. Oh, this is soft. This is, we're supposed to be going down into town, and we ended up going to Watford. But then with Carl not making it home, all of a sudden it was, well, this club we can't leave this club now. We've got to keep it going. And yeah, it was just one of those things, our last drink of the evening, another drink, Carl. And I think his exact words were something along the lines of, "Not for me, I've had enough bubbles tonight, I'm going home for a proper beer." And of course he never got there because a boy racer lost control of his car on a bend between St Albans and Hatfield and just wiped Carl out. So we got the dreaded phone call that night and went round to Anne's to be told that, he was killed instantly. So,
Gosh.
yeah.
And you tell this story through the first sort of chapter or so of this
Yeah,
book that you've
the
written, Where There's
introductory
a Will, There's
chapters
a
are
Way.
exactly about this occasion, and the effect it had on us as a family, and obviously on Carl's family even more. And that sort of stayed with me a couple of years later when the franchise opportunity came up. I saw what happened with the rules of intestacy. Carl didn't have a will. I saw what Anne went through, and yeah, something seemed to click. It's almost, serendipity. This is for me.
You also describe about the way that you helped out the family at the time as well, and you
Where I
played a role
could,
in supporting Anne as much as you could.
yeah, where possible. Myself and Josie, my wife, obviously we did as much as we could, which was never going to be enough. But yeah, he had an 18-month-old daughter, Chloe, who's mentioned in the book, and she's now a successful sort of journalist, magazine editor in her own rights. And the first thing I did when doing the book, because I wanted to put this part of the journey in the book, was to make sure that Chloe and Anne, Carl's widow, were okay with this, and they gave me 100% support. So it's good. It's good.
Why do you feel now is the time to pull this book together?
Good question. I thought about doing a book or writing a book. They say we've all got one good book in us, don't they, or something like that. And I did think I've always been an avid reader, and I thought about writing a book about direct sales and the funny things. If I'd have kept a diary of when I worked in Hong Kong or all over the place, it would make a great book. And I thought about even doing a fiction book, and this was all during lockdown. And then when we got working again, I just thought, yeah, I'm going to put this down on paper. I'm going to get this out there. And I didn't want it to be, like Parker's Will Precedents or something you stick on a shelf and you might look at it to look at, look something up for some regulation or some law or something. But I wanted it to be accessible. I wanted it to be, a lot of my business comes from talks I give at WIs and Rotary clubs and that sort of thing. And I like the language to be, plain English. People can understand it. And if I'm seeing someone face to face or I'm giving a talk to a group of people, I like it to be conversational. I like it to be understandable, and that's what I've tried to do with the book. Make it plain English.
So it's called Where There's a Will, There's a Way. Really like the title, Steve. What are you hoping to achieve with it, and what's the ambition of the book, just so that listeners understand? Because as you say, it's not a precedence book or anything like that, is it? It's much more sort of practical tool.
It's practical. It's examples. There's some humor in it. There's some illustrations in it and the cover art and that sort of thing. I was very lucky to meet a guy called Phil Littler, who's got a very, very exciting background. He's worked with Jerry Anderson, he's worked with Disney, he's worked with major film studios, he's illustrated many books over the years. And yeah, I like the artwork in there. It shows just from the cover, it shows that it's not a dusty president's tomb. It's what I want it to be, which is sort of pick it up and say, oh, I like the look of that. Let's have a look inside. So yeah, what am I looking to achieve? Well, I'd like to say, a multi-million-pound international bestseller, but that's about as likely as Scotland winning the World Cup. If I can just, sell a few hundred copies and I can say, yeah, my book's been published, people have bought it, people are reading it. It's been well received so far, which is great, and we'll just see where it goes. But it's not going to be my retirement by any means.
And it's as much for consumers as it is for professionals, isn't it? Because it's telling the story of why people might need a will, as you say, using examples of particular scenarios that might affect them. I mean, have you got some examples of scenarios you use in the book, Steve?
Yeah, there's talk about wills that have been written on a cake box, and there are precedents, but they're quite humorous precedents, if you like. Explanations as to what needs to be done, when it needs to be done, the roles of an executor, etc. I've made it clear on the cover blurb that it's not to replace individual expert advice, and whether that advice comes from me or whether it comes from someone else, it's not there to replace that. It's just something that can be read, it can be picked up, and you can pop into bits of it that might be appropriate for you. So yeah, it's that type of book, so you can put down, pick up as and when, and it's not meant to replace solicitors or estate planners in any way whatsoever.
I often think that that the profession isn't particularly good at promoting itself, and I think sometimes by its own admission as well. Lawyers and estate planners, they're good at the technical bits of the law, but they're not always particularly good at the sort of promotional bits of it. And perhaps, harking back to what you said about your previous life, Steve, where you weren't an artisan, but you were you were a marketeer. You understood how to sell the thing, even if you couldn't produce
Absolutely. I mean, with the window company, I wasn't, a skilled carpenter or craftsman in any way, but, I knew people who were. So I was more on the marketing side of the company. And I think that was what I liked about the franchise. It was, you could just sort of help people by showing them what they need and pointing out problems. And people are more aware of the problems these days. 20 years ago when I started, and we talk about, the 1990 Care Act and people losing their homes, they were horrified. Just had never heard of anything so ridiculous. I've seen someone in Stevenage, for example, first generation homeowner, and to be told that the property might not end up going down to their sons or daughters literally horrified people. Whereas now, of course, people are much, much more aware. Everyone knows someone who's been in that situation. Everyone knows someone who perhaps should have got an LPA or back in the day an EPA, but they didn't. And now the family have got to go down the caller protection route with deputyship and so forth. Everyone knows someone who's, when I do a talk, someone will always put their hand up and say they've experienced sideways disinheritance, where one of the parents has remarried after the death of their first one, and everything's gone to the wicked stepmom or whatever. It's much more, people are much more aware of estate planning these days. That's what I think makes it much easier now than it was 20 years ago.
That's interesting, because I think there's still plenty of stats out there that suggest that, for example, there's lots of people that simply don't understand the fact that, marriage annuls will, or, the rules of intestacy and that kind of thing. It's interesting to hear you say that you think that there has been a shift. How long have you been in the sector, Steve?
20 years last year, 21 years this year.
So
yeah, there's definitely been a shift in awareness. But as you point out, there's still lots of people out there who don't realise in a marriage, as you say, will revoke any previous wills. I had to point that out to someone at a business meeting only a few weeks before Christmas, and the chap was talking about getting married and want to talk to me afterwards. And I said, well, yeah, because anything you've got in place now is revoked. Is it? Is it really? And I said, yes, it does. Unless you've written it with, a contemplation of marriage clause, then it's not going to be valid anymore. So yes, there's still more education needed, but there are more people who are aware, I think, of some of the problems than there used to be. So we're moving in the right direction, maybe not fast enough.
I guess if we're thinking about how firms can better educate clients and how we as professionals can better educate people, things like this book are great tools, Steve, to help both professionals deliver out that message, but also for individuals to receive that message, and finding different ways to deliver that message and for people to receive that message is really important, isn't it?
Absolutely. And as you touched on earlier, maybe a lot of the legal profession aren't that good at promoting themselves or marketing themselves. There's a chap called Charlie Lawson who spoke at the Legal Growth Conference last year or the year before. He's got a marvelous book. His first one was The Unnatural Networker, but he's followed it up with The Unnatural Promoter. And it really is written from the point of view of someone who's shy and not naturally sort of good at pushing themselves out there and getting themselves or their company known. I would recommend those for people in the profession, The Unnatural Networker and The Unnatural Promoter, both very, very good sources of ideas for getting yourself out there and your company out there.
And you mentioned that the premise of those books, for example, is that they're written in a style where this particular chap is quite shy. He's trying to explain how he developed those skills. I mean, did you have a voice in your head when it came to writing your own book, Steve, as to how you wanted to present the story and how you wanted to present the book? I mean, is it your voice, for example, or is it somebody else's? Is it Carl's voice?
I've tried to do it as the voice when I'm giving a talk to a group of people. It's supposed to be understandable, relatable. It's not supposed to be dusty and dreary and too factual. It is factual, obviously, but it's supposed to be written in a way that people can understand it. That's the bottom line. It's got to be understandable. It's got to be relevant, and a touch of humour here and there.
We are moving towards the end of the time that we have together for the discussion, Steve. And I guess I just wanted to finish on really a question to you about just the impact that Carl had on your life. So, clearly it's pretty profound. You changed career. It's ultimately led you to produce this book and to share that story. Have you, why was Carl such an important person to you, and why do you think he had that kind of profound impact on your life?
We just became friends instantly, really. We had a lot in common, and we've stayed very, very close to Anne since then, and Chloe as she's grown up. I've got to admit there was a little bit of guilt as well when he died. He bought his vintage Lambretta purely because I bought my vintage Vespa, and he even borrowed a few quid for the purchase from me. So yeah, when he died, it did hit me quite hard, I've got to admit. And yeah, if I can keep him alive in some way in just the first chapter there in the book, then job done.
One of the things I take away from running today's Wills and Probate and talking to people through the podcast is people are often, very particularly in this sector, driven by personal experience. And I've spoken to a number of different founders of businesses who have all expressed very similar kind of views to you, Steve, where something very personal has happened to them. And it's had a big impact on them in some way, whether it's, an experience of going through probate that's inspired them to try and improve the process, or to your own experience, Steve, trying to get people to understand the importance of estate planning and later life planning. It's definitely a sector that lends itself to that sort of life experience, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. I think you can see that from the average age of people in the industry. A bit of life experience I think it's invaluable when you're speaking to clients. It's one of the industries, I think, where maturity is an advantage rather than a disadvantage.
Mm-hmm. Oh, no. Well, thank you so much for joining the podcast. Thank you for sharing your story, which, I appreciate is hugely important to you. Where There's a Will, There's a Way is available on your website, isn't it? Tell us a little bit about how we can get hold of it.
On the website, which is sbishestateplanning.com, there is a section called Book, and it can be purchased there. A minimum of £2 from every sale is donated to a charity called the Chaotic Angels Foundation. Hopefully it will be available on Amazon later this week, and I'll try and make it available from as many outlets as possible, obviously.
Brilliant. Well, thanks so much for joining the podcast, Steve. Really appreciate it.
Again, thanks for having me. Pleasure to be here.
The Today's Wills and Probate podcast is available on your preferred podcast provider. It's also available on today'swillsandprobate.co.uk. My thanks to Steve. Thank you as ever for listening, and we'll see you again soon.